delegation of Kenya. I now give the floor to the chairman of the delegation of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines, His Excellency Camillo Gonsalves.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 5.5 years ago, world leaders gathered in Monterey and emphatically stated that, quote, our goal is to eradicate poverty, achieve sustained economic growth, and promote sustainable development as we advance to a fully inclusive and equitable global economic system, unquote. Today, the question you have put before us, Mr. President, is whether we have lived up to those noble sentiments. In an environment of uneven progress towards the MDGs, of reduced ODA, and of entrenched global inequality, we must concede that in spite of some welcome bright spots, our collective post-Monterey process has been inauspicious. Mr. President, the operative word in the phrase financing for development is development. The Monterey Consensus cannot be viewed through the prism of balance sheet sleight of hand, where items are rotated from one budgetary column to another in a grand international shell game. We must focus on our commitment to improving the lots of billions of people worldwide living in crushing and unimaginable poverty. Such a people-centered perspective recognizes that there can be no one-size-fits-all approach to development. We must abandon the monolithic, inflexible, process-driven approaches to financing that have doomed so many initiatives. The efficient and flexible disbursement of financing will be more beneficial than simply increasing the amounts of financing available under existing modalities. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example, farmers seeking generously donated financing for agricultural diversification have found themselves hopelessly mired in externally imposed red tape and requirements that are impracticable in the domestic context. These farmers, who are on the front line of the fallout from globalization and iniquitous agricultural subsidies, find themselves lost in a world of bureaucrats and no closer to the promised and much-needed developmental assistance. Small countries like ours would benefit if donor countries streamline their financing apparatus in such a way as to recognize our gains in democracy, anti-corruption, and good governance, and therefore trust us to give relatively small amounts of money to a variety of small projects without impractical bureaucratic encumbrances. Mr. President, most middle-income countries and small island developing states were not given a fresh developmental start at Monterey. We were left, as always, to uncomfortably serve two exacting masters: foreign creditors, for whom debt servicing and belt tightening are paramount, and our domestic populations, for whom expanded social and infrastructural investments are urgently required. Small middle-income countries are being excluded from comprehensive debt relief in a manner that calls into question the sincerity of the commitments made at Monterey. Indeed, for all but the most heavily indebted countries, there is a vexing conundrum. Indebted countries, whose very indebtedness compromises their governance and stability, are told to clean up their domestic act as a precondition for debt relief. Middle-income countries, on the other hand, often stable and well-governed, are told that their marginal competence at avoiding economic disaster precludes them from debt relief. As such, middle-income countries, home to 41% of the world's poor, are condemned like Sisyphus to push the debt boulder endlessly uphill. If broad debt cancellation is unpalatable in the abstract, surely it is not beyond the ingenuity of this body to fashion ways in which a debtor nation can satisfy its obligations to creditors by reallocating its debt servicing dollars domestically upon mutually agreed development projects. Mr. President, St. Vincent and the Grenadines again bemoans the imposition of trade-distorting barriers and subsidies, which short-sightedly serve the gods of political domestic expediency. These policies are investments in instability, unrest, and underdevelopment, and as we have seen, solving the global repercussions and manifestations of these policies requires much more than 0.7% of GNP. In that context, St. Vincent and the Grenadines echoes host Cora, managing director of the IMF, who stated to ECOSOC in 2003 that, quote, advanced economies must live up to their pledges, and the long-standing target of 0.7% of GDP remains for me a concrete test of their credibility, unquote. The Monterey Consensus must be viewed holistically, and the continued failure of some nations to make tangible progress towards this modest goal belies their commitment to the process. St. Vincent and the Grenadines notes that the concept of ODA totaling 0.7% was first mooted in 1969. This was before the challenges of climate change, the digital divide, or the special developmental issues of the post-Cold War and post-9/11 world. By right, the question we should be asking ourselves today is whether 0.7% is enough, not whether it is achievable. It is past time that this moral benchmark be given juridical effect and automaticity of process. Mr. President, development in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is heavily dependent on ODA, foreign investment, and technical cooperation, and we are deeply grateful for the bilateral assistance we continue to receive from countries in North America, Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. We also recognize the indispensable role of South-South cooperation in achieving the lofty goals of the Monterey Consensus. As such, St. Vincent and the Grenadines is grateful for the initiatives of Cuba and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, despite their initial criticisms of the Monterey process, and the Republic of China and Taiwan, despite its continued unjust exclusion from this body. They have proven themselves to be willing and innovative partners in development, and in this regard, exemplary global citizens. Mr. President, one of the greatest artists of our Caribbean civilization, the late Bob Marley, once observed that a hungry mob is an angry mob. The Monterey Consensus embraces the same principle, recognizing that, quote, peace and development are mutually reinforcing. Recognition of this interdependence between development and peace means that enhanced development requires an enhancement of the international system of peace and security. Accordingly, we view the expansion and democratization of the Security Council as an integral component of further credible global development. Mr. President, in closing, we recall the words of our Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves at Monterey in 2002, when he prayed that the conference would not devolve into, quote, a dragon's dance upon a decorous platform of the finest diplomatic language, which few are determined to embrace for action, unquote. Put another way, talk is cheap, and the road to hellish underdevelopment is paved with good intentions. 5 years after Monterey, all countries, developed and developing alike, must deliver on our well-meaning words. I thank you.
I thank the chairman of the delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I now give the floor